Margaret Chen had circled October 15th on her calendar in red ink. After 29 years, 11 months, and 27 days at Hartwell Manufacturing, that Tuesday would mark her 30th anniversary, the day her full pension would finally vest. She'd already submitted her retirement paperwork for December, planning to spend the holidays as a free woman for the first time since 1995. The email arrived at 8:47 a.m. on Friday, October 12th. Please report to Conference Room B at 2:00 p.m. today. Bring your access badge and company equipment. It was signed by someone in HR she'd never heard of. Maggie stared at the message, her coffee growing cold. In 3 decades, she'd never been summoned to a disciplinary meeting. Her performance reviews were spotless. She'd caught more manufacturing defects than any other quality control manager in company history, saving Hartwell millions in recalls and lawsuits. Hell, she'd probably saved lives. At exactly 2:00 p.m., Maggie knocked on the conference room door. Inside sat James Hartwell Jr., the CEO who'd inherited his position when his father passed 5 years ago, flanked by 2 people she didn't recognize. A stern woman with a legal pad and a nervous young man clutching a manila folder. "Miss Chen, please sit." Hartwell Jr. didn't look up from his phone. At 42, he had the soft features of someone who'd never worked a day on the factory floor. Unlike his father, who'd started the company with calloused hands and a lunch pail. The woman spoke first. "I'm Sandra Kovac from Human Resources. This is David from Legal. We need to discuss some serious performance issues that have come to our attention." "Performance issues?" Maggie's chest tightened. "I'm not sure what you mean. My last review was exemplary, and I'm 3 days away from—" "We're aware of your upcoming anniversary," Hartwell Jr. interrupted, finally putting down his phone, "which makes this situation particularly unfortunate. It's come to our attention that you've been filing unnecessary safety reports, creating undue alarm among staff and potentially exposing the company to regulatory scrutiny." Maggie's mouth fell open. "Unnecessary? I filed those reports because I documented actual safety violations. That's my job. That's what I've been doing for nearly 30 years. David from Legal slid a folder across the table. "According to our investigation, you fabricated safety concerns in multiple reports over the past 6 months. You've created a hostile work environment through fear-mongering and have endangered company operations through what can only be described as sabotage." The words hit her like a physical blow. Maggie opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of her safety reports, but they'd been altered. Dates changed, severity levels inflated, her careful documentation twisted into something unrecognizable. "This is falsified," she whispered, then louder. "These aren't my original reports. Someone has doctored these documents." Miss Chen, Sandra's voice was professionally cold. "Effective immediately, your employment with Hartwell Manufacturing is terminated for cause. Please surrender your access badge and any company property." The room spun. 29 years, 11 months, 27 days. 3 days, 3 goddamn days. "You can't do this. I have rights. I have security will escort you to collect your personal items," Hartwell Jr. said, standing. "Your final paycheck will be mailed. Good luck, Miss Chen." 2 security guards appeared as if summoned. Maggie recognized them. She'd chatted with Mike about his daughter's soccer games. Had brought Tom homemade cookies last Christmas. Now they couldn't meet her eyes as they flanked her through the factory floor. Every face turned to watch. Colleagues she'd worked beside for decades. People whose safety she'd protected, whose problems she'd listened to over coffee breaks. The shame burned hotter than the rage as they whispered and stared. Her personal items fit in a single cardboard box, a coffee mug, a photo of her late husband David, a small succulent plant. 29 years, 11 months, 27 days reduced to objects that barely filled 12 inches of cardboard. As the security guards walked her to the parking lot, Maggie turned back to see Hartwell Jr. watching from his corner office window, phone pressed to his ear. He was smiling. For 3 days Maggie sat in her kitchen, staring at the termination paperwork, unable to process what had happened. The phone rang constantly, former colleagues calling to express shock and outrage, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. The shame was suffocating. 30 years of spotless service, and now everyone would remember her as the woman who got fired for performance issues. On Monday morning, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole she saw Jenny Martinez, a young woman from HR who'd always been friendly during the rare times their paths crossed. "Miss Chen, I'm so sorry to bother you at home." Jenny's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes darting nervously up and down the street. "Could I come in? I need to tell you something." Jenny sat at Maggie's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking from. "What they did to you, it's not the first time. I probably shouldn't be here, but I can't sleep knowing what I know, and not saying anything." "What do you mean?" "There's a list." Jenny pulled out her phone, fingers trembling as she scrolled. "Hartwell Jr. keeps a spreadsheet. Employees approaching major benefit milestones, pension vesting, long-term disability eligibility, retirement health coverage. He calls it liability management." The words settled like stones in Maggie's stomach. How many? 15 people in the last 2 years, all within months of qualifying for major benefits. Jenny's voice cracked. "Robert Kowalski from maintenance. Remember him? 32 years, terminated for safety violations 2 weeks before his pension fully vested. Maria Santos from accounting. Let go for bookkeeping errors a month before her 25-year health benefits kicked in." Maggie remembered them all. Good people, dedicated workers who'd suddenly vanished from the company with whispered rumors of misconduct. She'd assumed the stories were true. Why would she doubt them? The documentation is always falsified. Jenny continued. HR gets a directive from upstairs. We build a file and legal signs off. I thought it was legitimate until I started seeing the pattern. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. Why are you telling me this? Jenny looked up, tears in her eyes. Because my mom worked at a factory for 28 years. They did the same thing to her, found an excuse to fire her right before retirement. She lost everything, had to move in with us, never recovered from the humiliation. I see her in you, Miss Chen, and I can't be part of this anymore. After Jenny left, Maggie sat alone with the terrible truth. This wasn't about her performance, or her safety reports. This was systematic, calculated. Hartwell Jr. was destroying people's lives to pad his profit margins, and he'd been getting away with it for years. She thought about Robert Kowalski, who'd had to sell his house and move to a studio apartment. Maria Santos, who'd taken a job at a grocery store at 62 because she couldn't afford to retire. All those people whose lives had been shattered while she'd gone about her business, never questioning, never investigating. The shame began to transform into something else, something harder and more focused. That night, Maggie pulled out her laptop and started making lists. Maggie's dining room table disappeared under stacks of papers, printouts, and legal pads covered in her precise handwriting. For 2 weeks, she worked 16-hour days, methodically building her case like the quality control engineer she'd always been. Every detail mattered, every connection had to be documented. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tommy Rodriguez, a maintenance worker she'd barely known, called her on a Tuesday morning. "Miss Chen? I heard what happened to you. I got fired last month. They said I was stealing copper wire. Complete bullshit, pardon my language. But I kept some things, you know? Stuff they probably didn't want me to keep." Tommy arrived that afternoon with a box of documents he'd forgotten to return. Maintenance schedules, repair orders, and most importantly, safety violation reports that had been filed but never addressed. Reports that Maggie had never seen, despite being head of quality control. "Hartwell Jr. has been burying these for months," Tommy explained. "Serious stuff too, faulty electrical systems, structural problems with the overhead cranes. If OSHA knew about half this shit, they'd shut us down tomorrow." Maggie cross-referenced Tommy's documents with her own file. The pattern was damning. Every safety concern that might cost money to fix had been suppressed, while minor issues that could be blamed on workers were amplified and used as grounds for termination. Next, she reached out to the other terminated employees Jenny had mentioned. Not all responded, some were too broken, too afraid, or too proud to revisit their humiliation. But enough did. Robert Kowalski drove 4 hours to sit at her kitchen table and tell his story. Maria Santos sent copies of her falsified performance reviews. Each victim had a piece of the puzzle. "He's not just stealing our pensions," Robert said, his weathered hands shaking as he flipped through documents. "He's liquidating the whole pension fund. Look at these quarterly reports." Robert had worked in payroll for 3 decades and knew how to read financial statements. The pension fund, which should have held nearly $40 million, had been systematically drained. Money transferred to operational expenses and capital improvements that didn't exist. He's been embezzling for years, Robert continued, betting that enough of us would die or get fired before we could claim benefits. The bastard's been gambling with our futures. As the evidence mounted, Maggie realized legal action would take years these people didn't have. Robert was living on Social Security and food stamps. Maria had diabetes and couldn't afford insulin. Time was a luxury none of them possessed. But Maggie had something else. Institutional knowledge. 30 years of understanding every system, every weakness, every pressure point in Hartwell Manufacturing's operation. She knew which safety violations would trigger immediate government intervention. She knew Hartwell Jr.'s personal habits, his insecurities, his secrets. She also knew his vulnerabilities. Through careful questioning of former colleagues still at the company, Maggie learned that Hartwell Jr. was under pressure from the board to take the company public. His father's will had established a trust that would dissolve if the company went bankrupt or faced major regulatory action. Most importantly, she discovered he'd been having an affair with his secretary while his wife, daughter of a major investor, remained oblivious. The plan that emerged was surgical in its precision. Phase 1 would target the company's operational weaknesses, forcing expensive shutdowns and regulatory scrutiny. Phase 2 would expose the financial crimes to the appropriate authorities, time to maximum damage. Phase 3 would be personal, using his own secrets against him when he was most vulnerable. But the masterstroke would be psychological. Hartwell Jr. was a coward who'd inherited everything and earned nothing. He'd crumble under real pressure, and Maggie intended to apply that pressure systematically until he broke. She spent her final week of preparation gathering contact information for investigative journalists, labor rights attorneys, and most importantly, the wives and family members of the terminated employees who deserved to know exactly who had destroyed their lives and why. On a cold November morning, exactly 1 month after her termination, Maggie sat down at her computer and began typing the first anonymous email to OSHA's whistleblower hotline. The subject line read, "Immediate safety violations at Hartwell Manufacturing, worker lives at risk." She paused before hitting send, thinking of her late husband David, who'd always said the measure of a person wasn't how they handled success, but how they responded to betrayal. "Time to find out what I'm made of," she whispered, and clicked send. The OSHA inspection hit Hartwell Manufacturing like a sledgehammer on a Tuesday morning in late November. Maggie watched from her car across the street as 3 government vehicles pulled into the parking lot, followed an hour later by local news crews who'd been tipped off anonymously. The factory floor evacuation made the evening news. Serious safety violations, the reporter announced, including faulty electrical systems and structural damage to overhead equipment that could have resulted in worker fatalities. Hartwell Jr.'s face was pale in the background footage as he spoke with investigators. Maggie allowed herself a small smile. Phase 1 had begun. By Friday, the plant was shut down indefinitely pending a full safety audit. 600 workers were sent home without pay while repairs that should have been done months ago were finally addressed. The local newspaper ran a scathing editorial about corporate negligence, and the state labor department announced their own investigation. But Maggie was already moving to Phase 2. She'd spent weeks carefully documenting the pension fund embezzlement, creating a paper trail so clear that even the most overworked federal investigator couldn't miss it. The anonymous package she mailed to the IRS contained photocopies of quarterly reports, bank transfer records Tommy had forgotten to return, and a detailed timeline showing exactly when money had been diverted and where it had gone. A second identical package went to the state attorney general's office, a third to the Department of Labor's pension fraud division. Then she waited. The beauty of bureaucracy, Maggie had learned, was its inevitability. Once triggered, investigations took on a life of their own. She didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to point the right people in the right direction and let them do their jobs. 2 weeks later, federal agents arrived at Hartwell Manufacturing with search warrants. Maggie watched from a different vantage point this time, the parking lot of a diner that had a clear view of the corporate offices. She ordered coffee and pie and watched through the window as boxes of documents were carried out. That evening she made her first direct move. The package arrived at Hartwell Jr.'s home address on a Saturday morning. Inside was a single photograph, him leaving a downtown hotel with his secretary Lisa, their body language making their relationship unmistakable. No note, no demands, just the photo and a printed email showing his wife's address. His wife Catherine received her own package on Monday. Hers contained copies of credit card statements showing expensive dinners, hotel charges, and jewelry purchases that she'd never seen. Again, no note, just the evidence, allowing her to draw her own conclusions. By Wednesday, Hartwell Jr. had moved out of his family home. The divorce filing made the local paper's business section, since Catherine's family were major investors in the company. But Maggie's cruelest stroke was yet to come. She'd spent hours researching every family affected by Hartwell Jr.'s pension scheme. She found addresses, phone numbers, and email contacts for spouses, children, and grandchildren. Each family received a carefully crafted letter explaining exactly what had happened to their loved one, not the company's version about performance issues, but the truth about systematic age discrimination and pension theft. Maria Santos's daughter called her sobbing after receiving the letter. "Mom, is this true? Did they really steal your pension?" Robert Kowalski's son drove in from Chicago, furious and demanding answers. Within days, families were calling lawyers demanding investigations, sharing their stories on social media. The media attention grew exponentially. What had started as a local story about safety violations became a regional scandal about corporate pension theft. An investigative reporter from the state capitol picked up the story, and suddenly Hartwell Manufacturing was facing scrutiny from every angle. Hartwell Jr. tried to control the narrative with a press conference, but it backfired spectacularly. Protesters, family members of terminated employees gathered outside the building with signs reading "Pension Thief" and "29 Years Stolen." The local news footage showed him sweating under the lights as reporters peppered him with questions about the missing pension fund. "These are baseless accusations," he stammered, from disgruntled former employees with personal vendettas. But the federal investigation was no longer theoretical. The IRS had frozen company accounts. The Department of Labor was demanding answers. The state attorney general announced a criminal investigation into pension fraud. Maggie's phone rang on a Thursday evening in December. Unknown number. "You think you're pretty clever, don't you?" Hartwell Jr.'s voice was slurred, desperate. "I know it's you, Chen. You're behind all of this." Maggie had been expecting this call. She'd prepared for it. "I'm sorry, who is this?" she asked calmly. "Don't play games with me. You want to destroy my company. Fine, but you're destroying 600 jobs. You're hurting innocent people." "Innocent people," Maggie repeated. "Like the 15 employees you fired to steal their pensions. Like the workers you put at risk by ignoring safety violations. That's business. That's how the world works. Then maybe the world needs to change." The line went quiet for a moment. When Hartwell Jr. spoke again, his voice had changed, become pleading, pathetic. "What do you want?" "Money. I can make this right. Name your price." Maggie looked at the photo of her late husband on the mantel, remembering his integrity, his belief that some things couldn't be bought or sold. "I want justice," she said simply, "and tomorrow you're going to give it to me." She hung up, knowing that everything she'd set in motion was about to converge on one final devastating moment. The call came at exactly 9:00 a.m. on Friday, December 15th. Maggie had been expecting it, but the desperation in Hartwell Jr.'s voice still surprised her. "Chen, we need to talk. In person. Today. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Mr. Hartwell. Please." The word came out broken, pathetic. "The feds are coming Monday. They're going to arrest me. My lawyers say I need to make this right. With you. With everyone." Maggie sat quietly, letting him fill the silence with his panic. "I can fix this," he continued, voice cracking. "I can restore the pensions. All of them. I can make you whole. But I need your help to make this go away. Meet me at the factory. Main gate, 1 hour." She paused, then added, "Come alone." What Hartwell Jr. didn't know was that Maggie wouldn't be alone either. She'd spent the morning making careful preparations. First, she'd called Jenny Martinez, who had finally quit HR in disgust and was eager to help document everything. Then she'd contacted Sarah Kim, the investigative reporter who'd been covering the story. Finally, she'd made the most important call to Detective Morrison at the state attorney general's office, who'd been building the criminal case. "He's going to confess," Maggie told Morrison, "today, but I need you to hear it directly. We can't use anything obtained without proper. He's calling me, voluntarily, if I happen to have the call on speaker, and if other people happen to be present." She let the implication hang. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "What time?" Now, standing at the factory gate where she'd been escorted out 2 months ago, Maggie watched Hartwell Jr.'s Mercedes pull into the empty parking lot. He looked like he'd aged 10 years, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, the confident swagger replaced by hunched shoulders and darting eyes. Her phone was already recording when he approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you fired me 3 days before my pension vested," Maggie interrupted. "After 29 years of perfect service, using falsified documents. Then you threatened me last night. So let's skip the pleasantries, right? Yes. Look, I made mistakes, poor judgment, but we can fix this." He pulled out a folder, hand shaking. "I've prepared reinstatement papers, full pension restoration, and a settlement. A generous settlement in exchange for your cooperation in resolving these misunderstandings with the government." Misunderstandings. Maggie's voice was flat. "Is that what you call stealing $40 million from the pension fund?" "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed against future earnings. The money was always going to be paid back. After you fired everyone who might claim it." Hartwell Jr.'s composure cracked completely. "Do you have any idea what kind of pressure I was under? The board breathing down my neck, demanding cost cut. My father's trust requiring profitability targets. I had to make hard choices. Hard choices." Maggie stepped closer, her voice rising. "Robert Kowalski lost his house. Maria Santos can't afford insulin. 15 families destroyed because you wanted to pad your quarterly reports. It was business," he shouted. "It was just fucking business. You think I enjoyed firing people. You think it was personal. It became personal when you falsified my records. When you had security escort me out like a criminal. When you smiled while watching from your office window." "I never," he stopped, realizing the admission. "Look, maybe I handled your case poorly, but my case. What about the others? Tell me about your liability management spreadsheet. Tell me about the systematic targeting of employees approaching benefit milestones." He went pale. "How do you know about that? Tell me about the safety violations you buried, the ones that could have killed people. Those were judgment calls. Cost-benefit analyses. We couldn't shut down production for every minor. Tommy Rodriguez almost died when that crane cable snapped. You knew it was defective. You had reports going back 6 months. We couldn't afford the downtime." The words exploded out of him. "Do you know what it cost to shut down a production line? The company was hemorrhaging money. I had to make choices. So you chose to risk workers' lives and steal their pensions. I chose to save the company. I chose to preserve 600 jobs instead of bankrupting the whole operation." His voice turned pleading again. "You want to destroy me? Fine, but you're destroying everyone else too. The workers who are still there, their families, the workers you put at risk every day by ignoring safety violations, the workers I kept employed." He was sweating now, despite the December cold. "Look, I admit it, I made mistakes. I cut corners. Maybe I took more from the pension fund than I should have, but I can fix it. I can make everyone whole again, including the people you murdered." "I never murdered anyone." Tommy Rodriguez's heart attack last month. Stress from losing his job, his house, his health insurance. Maria Santos's diabetic episodes because she can't afford medication. How many more? Those aren't. He was breathing heavily, panic setting in. "Look, I'll confess. To the pension thing, I'll plead guilty, do my time, whatever. But I need your help to negotiate with the prosecutors. You have influence now, credibility. If you speak for me, speak for you." Maggie's voice was deadly quiet. "After what you did, what I did was business. What you're doing is personal. You're not getting justice, you're getting revenge. Maybe they're the same thing." Hartwell Jr. stared at her, finally understanding that there would be no negotiation, no deal, no escape from the consequences of his actions. "You destroyed my life," he whispered. "No," Maggie replied, pulling out her phone to end the recording. "You destroyed your own life. I just made sure everyone found out about it." As his Mercedes pulled away, Maggie uploaded the recording to Detective Morrison, Sarah Kim, and one more recipient, the lawyer coordinating the class action lawsuit on behalf of all the terminated employees. By Monday morning, James Hartwell Jr.'s confession would be front-page news, and the criminal charges would be the least of his problems. The trial lasted 3 weeks. James Hartwell Jr. sat in the defendant's chair looking nothing like the arrogant executive who had smiled from his office window while Maggie was escorted out. His expensive suits couldn't hide the hollow look in his eyes or the way his hands shook when the prosecution played his recorded confession. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on 12 counts of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $47 million in restitution, every penny he'd stolen from the pension fund, plus interest and penalties. The defendant's actions, the judge said during sentencing, represent a particularly callous betrayal of the workers who devoted their lives to building his family's company. His crimes were not driven by desperation or necessity, but by greed and a fundamental disregard for human dignity. Hartwell Manufacturing was forced into federal receivership. The new management, overseen by court-appointed trustees, immediately restored all illegally terminated pensions and implemented the safety upgrades that should have been done years earlier. The factory reopened under new ownership 6 months later, with Tommy Rodriguez hired back as head of maintenance, but the criminal conviction was only the beginning. Maggie, representing all 15 terminated employees, plus their families, led a class action lawsuit that resulted in an additional $23 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The settlement included not just lost wages and benefits, but compensation for emotional distress, medical expenses caused by the stress of losing their jobs, and acknowledgement of the systematic nature of the discrimination. Robert Kowalski was able to buy back his house. Maria Santos could finally afford her insulin and proper medical care. Each family received enough to rebuild what had been taken from them, and more. Maggie's personal settlement was $2.8 million more money than she'd ever imagined having. But the victory felt hollow without David to share it with, and she knew exactly what she needed to do with it. The Margaret and David Chen Foundation for Worker Justice opened its doors on what would have been her original retirement date. The foundation provided legal assistance to older workers facing age discrimination, funded investigations into pension fraud, and offered emergency financial assistance to families whose breadwinners had been illegally terminated. No one should have to fight this battle alone, Maggie said at the foundation's launch event, surrounded by labor attorneys, investigative journalists, and the families she'd helped save. What happened to us was wrong, but it happens to workers every day across this country. We're going to make sure they have someone in their corner. 2 years after that devastating Friday in October, Maggie finally retired, this time on her own terms. She kept an office at the foundation, but spent her mornings in her garden tending to the vegetables David had always wanted to grow. The fight had aged her, left her more cynical about corporate promises and more protective of trust. But it had also revealed something she hadn't known about herself. When pushed to the wall, she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. The scared woman who'd been escorted out in shame was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the only way to find justice is to take it for yourself. On quiet evenings, she would sit on her back porch with a cup of tea and think about that phone call, the one that had changed everything. Hartwell Jr. had been right about one thing. What she'd done wasn't just about justice, it was about revenge. Sometimes she'd learned, they were exactly the same thing.